On a frigid March night in 2022, Bradley Cooper found himself alone in the main room of his Upper West Side Manhattan apartment. The minimalist loft, with its floor-to-ceiling windows facing Central Park, offered a view that normally calmed him, but not that night. The city lights flickered like artificial constellations, reflecting in the double glass that separated him from the world below, a world that in a few hours would judge him once again. The apartment's silence was broken only by the muffled sound of traffic 20 floors below and the relentless tick-tock of the vintage Patek Philippe watch he had inherited from his father. Each second marked the inevitable approach of the Oscar ceremony, where Bradley would face yet another nomination, this time for Nightmare Alley, the film he had directed and starred in, pouring his soul into every frame. In the adjacent room, he could hear Irina shake, getting ready for the ceremony. The soft rustling of a haute couture dress, the discreet click of jewelry being fastened, mundane sounds that on this night functioned as anchors of normalcy amid the whirlwind of anxiety consuming him. Bradley looked at his hands. They trembled slightly, not from cold but from a toxic mixture of hope and terror he knew all too well. 4 previous nominations, 4 public defeats broadcast to billions of people. Each time he had perfected his expression of polite applause, his gracious smile for the cameras that captured the exact moment when another name was announced. But inside, each Oscar no left a mark, a small crack in his self-esteem that he carefully hid from the world. The iPhone vibrated in his hand, breaking the heavy silence of the apartment like lightning. Bradley looked at the screen. Unknown number, area code +4, United Kingdom. Normally he would ignore it, especially on Oscar night when everyone wanted his attention, when desperate journalists tried to get a last quote. But something made him answer, an inexplicable compulsion that made him slide his finger across the screen. "Hello?" he said, his voice coming out hoarser than intended, loaded with tension. Silence. Just a strange background noise, like wind crossing an empty cathedral, or perhaps the distant echo of applause from a ghost audience. He almost hung up when a voice emerged from the static, a voice he recognized instantly, despite it being completely impossible. "Bradley, my young friend." The voice carried the unmistakable British aristocratic accent, that theatrical cadence that had marked an entire generation of cinema lovers, each syllable pronounced with the precision of a veteran Shakespeare performer. "It's Peter." The blood froze in Bradley's veins. His fingers tightened around the phone with such force that his knuckles turned white. Peter O'Toole had died in December 2013. He knew this with the certainty of someone who had sent condolences to the family, who had cried reading the obituary in the New York Times. But that voice, every inflection, every dramatic pause, was unmistakably his. "Who is this?" Bradley asked, but he already knew. That voice he had heard 1,000 times in Lawrence of Arabia, whose every inflection, every theatrical pause he had memorized during years of cinematic admiration. "Don't be foolish, Bradley. You know exactly who I am." O'Toole's voice had a spectral weight now, as if coming from very, very far away. "And you know why I'm calling, don't you? On the eve of another, how do you Americans like to say, shot at the Oscar?" Bradley sat heavily in the Italian leather armchair facing the window. Below, Manhattan pulsed with nightlife, but he felt completely isolated from the world, suspended in an alternate reality where the dead called to give advice. "Because you know what it's like to lose," Bradley said, not as a question but as a bitter statement. "You know what it's like to sit in that audience expecting to hear your name and hear any name except yours." A low, melancholic laugh echoed through the phone, loaded with decades of refined disappointment. "Ah, Bradley, 8 Oscar nominations. 8 times I sat in that damned audience with impeccable tuxedo and rehearsed smile like a Shakespearean actor, waiting to hear my name. And 8 times, deafening silence." O'Toole paused, and Bradley could almost visualize the legendary actor lighting a cigarette with that elegant gesture that characterized him, blowing smoke with aristocratic disdain. "You know my story, don't you? Lawrence of Arabia, The Lion in Winter, Beckett, Goodbye, Mr. Chips, films that defined generations, that are still studied in film schools worldwide. But in the end, you know what they remembered when I died? The awards I didn't win, the golden statuettes that slipped through my fingers like sand in the Arabian desert. But you were brilliant, Peter. Everyone knew that. You were cinema," Bradley protested, genuine admiration showing in his voice. Being brilliant isn't enough, my dear naive boy. It never was. O'Toole's voice took on a deeper, almost conspiratorial tone. The Oscar isn't about art, Bradley. It's about politics, timing, narratives that the industry wants to tell at that specific moment. How many times have you heard that despicable phrase, "It wasn't your year"? Bradley closed his eyes tightly, feeling physical pain in his chest. He had heard exactly that after each defeat. After Silver Linings Playbook, they said Daniel Day-Lewis deserved it for Lincoln. After all, it was Lincoln. After American Sniper, that Eddie Redmayne was due with The Theory of Everything, the young talent playing Stephen Hawking. There was always an elegant justification, always a reason why it wasn't his moment in Hollywood's political cosmos. Then why continue? Bradley asked, raw vulnerability showing in his voice like an open wound. Why do we subject ourselves to this repeatedly like well-dressed masochists? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? O'Toole laughed bitterly. Because deep in our pathetic artistic souls, we believe this time will be different, and because, despite all the pain and public humiliation, we still love what we do. We still believe in the magic of cinema, in the transcendental capacity of a performance to touch hearts and change lives forever. Through the wall, Bradley heard Irina calling his name with growing urgency. In 15 minutes, the driver would arrive to take them to the Dolby Theatre. 15 minutes before another journey to Hollywood's golden scaffold, where they would publicly execute his hopes once again. "Peter," Bradley said, pressing the phone against his ear, as if he could physically hold on to the wisdom on the other side of the line. "How did you deal with it? With the constant disappointment, with the feeling of never being enough?" "I learned after much whiskey and self-pity that true victory isn't in the cold statuette, Bradley. It's in the superhuman ability to get up the morning after defeat and continue creating. It's in knowing that we touched lives, that our work will remain vibrating in culture long after the awards are forgotten on dusty shelves." O'Toole's voice began to grow more distant, as if he were slowly moving away through a time tunnel. "You have a rare gift, Bradley, rarer than diamonds. Direction, acting, production. You're a complete artist, a Renaissance creature in a world of mediocre specialists. Don't let desperate thirst for official recognition destroy your passion for pure art. I made that bitter mistake. I spent years poisoned by bitterness, obsessively focused on what I didn't achieve, instead of celebrating the masterpieces I created. But what if I never win? What if this is another public defeat, another humiliation broadcast live? Then you get up, dust the golden powder off your tuxedo and go back to work the next day. Because that's what true artists do, Bradley. We create, regardless of applause, boos, or deadly silence." Silence returned to the line for a moment that seemed eternal, but Bradley knew O'Toole was still there, waiting, like a benevolent, spectral presence. "And you know how I know all this is true, my young friend?" O'Toole's voice returned, now with an almost amused tone. "Because I'm watching everything from a place where Oscars mean absolutely nothing, where all that matters is whether you touched souls, whether you left your mark on art's eternity." "Thank you, Peter," Bradley whispered, feeling tears in his eyes, "for reminding me why I started all this, why I fell in love with cinema before I knew awards existed. Now go there and shine like the star you are, my young friend. Not for the golden prize, but for immortal art. And always remember, history's greatest artists were misunderstood, ignored, or rejected in their time. Van Gogh, Kafka, Orson Welles. Sometimes true recognition comes after death. Sometimes it comes in forms we never expect or imagine." The call ended with a soft click, leaving Bradley alone with the apartment's sudden silence. He looked at the phone, then at his ghostly reflection in the window. Something fundamental had changed in his soul. The anxiety hadn't completely disappeared. It still pulsed in his veins like adrenaline, but now it came accompanied by a completely different perspective, as if he had put on new glasses to see life. Irina appeared in the doorway, absolutely stunning in her black Versace dress that seemed sewn by angels. "Are you okay? You seem to be talking to someone important." Bradley put the phone in his tuxedo's inner pocket, feeling the device's comforting weight against his chest. "I was receiving some wisdom advice from an old friend." She smiled, kissing him lightly on the cheek so as not to smear her blood-red lipstick. "Shall we face this gladiator night?" "Let's go," Bradley replied, but for the first time in years of pre-Oscar anxiety, he wasn't going to the ceremony to win. He was going to honor his work, celebrate his art, and remind the world, and especially himself, why he had fallen madly in love with cinema before even knowing what a golden statuette was. In the armored limousine on the way to the Dolby Theatre, Bradley looked through the dark windows at Los Angeles's endless lights. He thought about Peter O'Toole, about the crushing weight of unmet expectations, about the transcendental beauty of a career dedicated entirely to art, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt a strange and deep peace facing the real possibility of another public defeat. The ceremony unfolded like a surreal dream. Coda absolutely surprised everyone by winning the Best Picture Oscar, defeating favorites like The Power of the Dog and Dune. And yes, Bradley's Nightmare Alley was also in the running as a respected underdog. The small independent film about deafness's victory was one of the biggest surprises in recent Oscar history, overshadowed only by the completely shocking incident where Will Smith gave Chris Rock a resounding slap during the presentation, creating the most viral television moment in decades. Bradley politely applauded both for Coda's emotional winners and for Will Smith when he won Best Actor for King Richard minutes after the scandal, but this time, the smile was completely genuine. There was no bitterness corroding his stomach, just serene acceptance and even joy for fellow artists. After the ceremony, at the exclusive after-party, several people approached him with well-intentioned but painful condolences. "You were completely robbed," they said with sincere indignation. "It should have been you, without doubt." But Bradley just smiled and thanked them with genuine grace, knowing that true victory wasn't in the hands of an academy of old executives, but in the unshakable ability to continue creating, to continue dreaming against all odds. Back at the apartment in the early, freezing hours of dawn, Bradley sat in the same armchair where he had received the impossible call. He looked at the phone, trying to rationally process what had happened. Maybe it was a waking dream, a desperate manifestation of his own need for spiritual guidance. Or maybe sometimes the universe sends us exactly the message we need to hear in the most unexpected and impossible way. He picked up a moleskin notebook and began feverishly writing ideas for his next film. Because that was exactly what true artists did. They continued creating obsessively, regardless of recognition, rewards, or applause. And for the first time in torturous years, Bradley Cooper felt truly free to create without the crushing weight of external expectations. The next morning, newspapers were absolutely full of headlines about the Oscars' viral incident, but there were also eloquent and praising critiques of his work in Nightmare Alley. He read one in the New York Times that particularly touched him like a punch to the heart. Bradley Cooper may not have taken the golden statuette home, but his unwavering commitment to pure cinema art is unquestionable. Some artists are measured by accumulated awards, others by the indelible and eternal mark they leave on human culture. He smiled, remembering O'Toole's prophetic words about true legacy and recognition that comes in completely unexpected forms. Maybe this was his real victory. Not a cold statuette on a shelf, but the absolute certainty that his work touched people deeply, inspired other artists around the world, and contributed to art's eternal conversation. Months later, Bradley received a call that would change everything. It was Martin Scorsese himself offering him the leading role in his next cinematic epic. "Your work in Nightmare Alley was absolutely extraordinary," the legendary director said with reverence. "It's exactly the kind of total artistic commitment I'm looking for in this project." While listening to Scorsese speak passionately about the project, Bradley remembered the supernatural call on Oscar night. O'Toole had spoken prophetically about recognition that comes in unexpected forms, about the sacred importance of continuing to create against all adversities. And there he was, being personally invited by one of cinema history's greatest directors for a project that could completely redefine his career and legacy. Maybe this was the cosmic lesson. Real success isn't measured only by shiny awards on shelves, but by the transcendental capacity to inspire, to touch lives deeply, to continue evolving as an artist until the last day of life. And when seen from this revolutionary perspective, Bradley Cooper had already won infinitely more than any golden statuette could ever represent. After following Bradley Cooper's transformative journey on Hollywood's most important night, some essential questions echo in our minds. How many times have you measured your success only by external recognition? What are the Oscars of your own life, those crucial moments when you deposit all your self-esteem in approval that may or may not come? The E. story of Bradley and Peter O'Toole's impossible spiritual advice reminds us of a fundamental truth. True victory lies in the courageous journey, not the final destination. It lies in the superhuman courage to continue creating when the world doesn't recognize, in the heroic capacity to find deep purpose beyond ephemeral applause. Cinema is full of painful stories of brilliant artists who never won the awards they deserved. Stanley Kubrick never won a directing Oscar. Citizen Kane shamefully lost to How Green Was My Valley. Taxi Driver was defeated by Rocky. But these losers continue influencing entire generations of filmmakers and passionate viewers around the world. And you? How do you deal with inevitable defeats in your field? Can you find transcendental value in the creative process, regardless of the final result? This story reminds us that sometimes the most important and transformative conversations we have are with eternal voices of wisdom, whether they're real or supernatural manifestations of our own desperate need for guidance. If this narrative deeply touched your heart, share in the comments. What would be your advice for someone facing repeated defeats in their deepest passion? Your artistic, professional, or personal journey has invaluable worth, regardless of the awards you receive or fail to receive. Sometimes, the greatest victory of all is simply having the courage to continue creating, dreaming, and believing against all the world's odds.